Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 1, and this is session 49. And what I want to do is just start us off with the verses that we have been studying. We're going to be in the middle of this, but here it is, Romans chapter 12. We'll start reading it in verse 10. Be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another, not slothful in business, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, distributing to the necessity of saints, given to hospitality. This is not all of this section on godly wisdom, but it is that single sentence that started in verse 10 and runs through verse 13. And I've talked to you about this several times, so let me just remind you of it, and then we can kind of move on, because verse 12 is the verse that we're really looking at. But today, what we're going to do is I'm going to go back. A lot of this you may already know, some of you, but I need us to take where we are now and go back and hook into something that has been presented to us, at least in some part, before, and bring that forward so that this gives us a way of thinking about this, seeing the bigger picture. That's really what we're trying to do here. You'll see more what I'm talking about as we get to this. But this verse 12, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer, is the perfect place for us to be able to do this. And I'm hoping that we can get this issue out in the open and remove all the fuzziness from it so that we really see what is at stake in us as we're looking at this list. There is a list of things here, but especially in verse 12, as we're looking at the three components that are contained in that verse, this is going to give us some insight into not only what God is doing with us as we are patient in tribulation, but it is also going to pull back the curtain a little bit on what God is doing today in the heavenly places. Now you might think, I don't think He's doing anything up there today. But I want you to, I guess, step back from this for a moment. And it's just like if you were to say to people, God's not doing this today and God's not doing this today, but here's what He is doing, because what He is doing is the work in our inner man. It doesn't show up in the physical world. People have the idea that He must not be doing anything. And the same might be true in the heavenly places. He's not actually repossessing them today, so you would think maybe He's doing nothing. But indeed, He is doing something, and we are a part of that as well. And that's one of the things that I wanted to get established from us right off the bat. And so if you say, well, what in the world could God be doing up there? Because after all, doesn't Satan and his minions have control of the heavenly places? That's one of the issues. You know that's true. They don't have total control, but they have a lot of it. And so today, I thought while we're on the subject, we'd take the time to look at what I'm looking at that makes me say that the heavens have been divided into 24 divisions. Satan has control over 23 of those 24, because I know from time to time someone hears me say that, and I get an email or something where they say, where did you get that? And so this will be a chance for me to just do it for everybody, and we'll all see that together. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to establish the fact with you, something that is written this way in the Bible all the time, but until you notice the pattern, it doesn't mean anything. God deals with the heaven and the earth separately. So much so that when He talks about the creation, we might use terminology to say God created the whole universe and everything that's in it. But God doesn't say it that way. He says He created the heaven and all the host of it, and the earth and all that in it is. And He makes a division between the heaven and the earth. And so I'm just going to walk you. I'm not going to, because I know there's people watching the DVD, I'm not going to assume anything. So we're just going to start here and move through, and we've really got to go fast to get it done. So here it is. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, as though those are two separate and distinct issues of the creation. And indeed they are. Chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. Did anybody catch the difference between chapter 1 and chapter 2? Yeah, there's a plural. Right. And I'll say it to you now, and I'll show it to you in a minute. But what happened is when God created that heaven, He actually makes a division in that heaven so that it becomes, it's a heaven, but now it's in two parts. And now He's going to refer to each part as a heaven. So together they become a plural. So by the time you get to chapter 2, He's now talking about heavens. All right, now chapter 2, verse 4. These are the generations of the heavens and of the earth when they were created in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. Do you see? It's almost like He's going to a lot of trouble to keep enunciating this distinction. It would have been real easy to say, in the day that the Lord God made them. But when you say it like that, you almost kind of pull them together into one, and there seems to be this pattern evolving in the Bible that all these things are going to be kept separate, and indeed they are. Not only in the Genesis account, but also in other places in the Bible, this same distinction is kept up. Look in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So even in Exodus, when it refers back to that, it's picking up that same distinct terminology. Deuteronomy 32, verse 1. Now, this doesn't have to do with the creation. But even though it's not to do with the creation, because God wants the entire creation to know something about this, look what He says. Give ear, O ye heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Now, it's interesting that God, and I think there really is something behind that, because there's something to be heard by the inhabitants of the heavens, just like there's something to be heard by the inhabitants of the earth. But He still makes that distinction. Again in 1 Chronicles 16:31, let the heavens be glad, and let the earth rejoice, and let men say among the nations, the Lord reigneth. Again, I'm just showing you, it doesn't even have to be about the creation account, and He's still using that distinctive. Nehemiah 9:6, thou, even thou art Lord alone, thou hast made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their host, the earth, and all the things that are therein, the seas, and all that is therein, and thou preservest them all, and the host of heaven worshipeth thee. Psalm 57:11, be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens, let thy glory be above all the earth. So I'm just showing you that even though He's not talking about what God created, He's still observing that distinction there. Let's see, Isaiah chapter, what is that? Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. I just gave you a sampling of these. There's no way we're going to take the time to run them all. I just wanted you to see that He didn't just do it in the creation account in Genesis. He does it about the creation account all through the Bible, and then He even makes that distinction in areas that don't have anything to do with the creative act. And so that's the thing that I was trying to get to. So here's what we know. We know that from what we're about to read from Paul, that there are 3 heavens. Now, for those of you that have been with me for a long time, you know that that's not a stretch, but you have a third heaven, you have a second heaven, and you have a first heaven. And Paul is going to talk about being caught up to the third heaven. Now, that is the heaven that we describe it by saying this is the abode of God. Now, we understand that God is omnipresent and He's everywhere, but there is a central place in which God is carrying on His work. We're going to see this described in more detail than this, but remember when Paul was at Lystra and he was stoned to death and he died, that means his soul and spirit would have left his body. And what he did was he describes the event where he was caught up to the third heaven, and he said, I saw things that's not lawful for a man to utter. And then God sent him back, and Paul continued his ministry. Now take a look at this in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. I knew a man in Christ about 14 years ago, rather in the body I cannot tell, or rather out of the body I cannot tell, God knoweth, such an one caught up to the third heaven. The only thing I'm really after in this because there really is a lot to discuss here. First of all, why is Paul talking in the third person here instead of himself? And what is that confusion about being in the body or not in the body? I cannot tell. But instead of taking our time, because we're going to run out as it is, I'm just trying to get us to the fact that Paul talks about there is something that he described as the third heaven. Now, I've done a lot of studies on this, and we've said a lot about it through the years. But I want you to understand that when you get to these heavens, they are all in reference to their proximity with the earth. In other words, the first heaven is going to be the one that is closest to the earth. The third heaven is the one that is going to be geographically furthest from the earth. And I know we could get into a discussion about dimensions, and maybe it's right there and all of that. But I have to tell you that the Bible talks about the third heaven not in that it is right here and it's just in a different dimension that cannot be seen, but it talks about it in proximity. It talks about it being a real place in a proximity in accordance with these other heavens. And so I'm just going to take it with that kind of terminology. We can have a discussion about those other issues later on, but God doesn't talk about it that way. So I'm not going to describe it that way either. So the first heaven, let's talk about this one. This one is actually going to turn out to be the area of the atmosphere around the earth. And I'm going to erase this at the break. But if this were the earth, we'll do this dotted line, and the first heaven will be that atmosphere around the earth. And the Lord describes it as heaven, and he doesn't use the word atmosphere, but here's how he does describe it. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 20. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven." And so this first one is called the open firmament of heaven. And if the birds are going to fly around in there, and by the way, can you climb a mountain high enough that the birds are flying below you? You sure can. And can you, to some degree, can you function there? Really, once you get up into that atmosphere, you really are. And so the fact that it's called the open firmament, if something is open, what's the idea that's... Yeah, you can move about. You have access. All of that is true. It's open. And now we're going to take a look at this second heaven, because that's going to... Now, that's the division that gets made, by the way. And so now we're going to talk about the rest of that. Now, we would call this outer space or the universe. Now, actually, this is going to be the second heaven, and it's going to contain some things. So let's take a look in Genesis 1:14. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth and to rule over the day and over the night and divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Now, there's some interesting terminology here, and again, we don't really have the opportunity to go into it here, but isn't it strange the way the Bible describes that is to rule over the day and rule over the night. There's something about that terminology. And the Bible's not, as we know, it has real precision to it. So there's something that's supposed to click in our understanding with regard to that. So I'm just saying it to you now, and you can study on that on your own until we actually get back to this. No, back me up. And so, but when he says, "And he set them in the firmament of the heaven," so we know that what's up here is the sun is up there, the moon is up there, all of those stars are up there, all the other things that are up there, they're all up there in the second heaven, and God put them up there. And it doesn't use the word, I'm just telling you up front, but by implication, if this is called the open firmament of heaven, this is the closed firmament. In other words, there's not as ready access, not the same freedom of movement. In other words, what you might be able to do to put yourself high up into the atmosphere on this earth is one thing, but once you leave this and get out into this, a lot of things need to happen in order for you to survive out there. And so just by, and I'm using the word closed, not to say that it absolutely can't be entered into, but to say that that's not what we were, this body that we're occupying now, that is not the natural way in which we would function out in that second heaven. One more, Genesis chapter 22, and this is where God is talking to Abram about the covenant that he's making with him. And he says that in blessing I'll bless thee, and in multiplying I'll multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven. And I'm just trying to show you again that that terminology is calling that a heaven. Okay, and so now what we need to do is we need to come to the third heaven, the one that we think of, and this is the, this is what we would normally call the universe or outer space or all that kind of bit. God doesn't use those words, but you understand what I'm saying when I call it that. I'm just trying to make a difference here between the two. So when we get to the third heaven, then this is, and by the way, I don't know if I should say it now or not. It is in this second heaven that God, once that was created, He set up a government in that second heaven, and He installed angels into positions of authority in that government. And when they were first installed into that, everything was fine. Then the rebellion happens. Now, if you're thinking about this carefully, and it's my understanding, well, I don't want to say that yet. If you're thinking about this carefully, you can kind of look at this and say, things had to happen pretty quickly. If between the time that God creates this area and puts the sun, the moon, and the stars in it, and creates Adam in the garden, that in between that time, that's when that rebellion had to take place, because God did not install fallen angels into His government. That rebellion happened after the fact. Now, we'll say more about that today, but I'm just trying to kind of set you up for thinking about the way those days tick off. Things are happening a lot more quickly. And if you can remember the study that I did on how long it was, Adam was created on which day? The sixth day. And if you remember, then you had the Sabbath. And what's going to happen, I talked to you about that here's the sixth day, then you've got the seventh day, and on the Sabbath following, that was when God had planned. He had already laid the beams of His chambers in the water. He was going to come down. He's going to set up His house on this earth. And so what Satan has to do, as far as Adam and Eve are concerned in the garden, has to be between the sixth day and that second Sabbath. And so all of that happens pretty quickly. And but again, we'll have opportunity to look at that, and I've already done a study on it, so I don't want to redo it. This government, it's my understanding that is in place before man comes along, that is already there. And those angels were installed into those positions. All right, and here's the next place I need to take you. Here's what causes this rebellion in the heavens. Satan has a plan. Isaiah chapter 14 gives us the 5 steps of that plan. The last of those steps is the very goal that he has. And here it is. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. There's number 1, I'll exalt my throne above the stars of God. 2, I'll sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Sit also, that's where God is, in the sides of the north. There's number 3, I'll ascend above the heights of the clouds, and that's not clouds on this earth, that's clouds up there. That's number 4. And then the 5th one is, I will be like the Most High. And as this group already knows, when you talk about the Most High, you're talking about a title that is given to God, and that title has meaning. We can go to Genesis 14, and we can see that defined. This is the thing between Melchizedek and Abraham, and he says, and he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Satan knows he cannot get rid of God. But what he can do is usurp control of the heaven and earth. And that's really what he's after, to be the possessor of heaven and earth. That's what it means to be the Most High. I can give you this other one in Genesis 14:22. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the possessor of heaven and earth. And when I say he usurps the control or the possession of those, he doesn't actually own them. And I realize there's a debate that could be made where, as you say on the timeline of events, that it was at the cross that Satan was defeated, and there are verses that actually tell us that. But let me ask you, has he been removed as the prince of this world? No. Has he been removed as the prince of power of the air? No. So God is waiting on something. And so even though that in fact everything for his undoing has been done, that has not yet all tumbled out, so to speak, or come to pass. Okay, so it's my understanding of this thing, and I think I've got one other verse. Let me give you this, and before I talk about that, and that is because Satan is, and that's what those two titles are about. For this, Jesus called him the prince of this world, and he gets that title when Adam falls. Do you remember what the command was given to Adam? To subdue and have dominion over the earth. And he didn't do that. And while he was supposed to keep the garden, which included the idea of guarding it, remember I set you up for this the last time? When all of that was happening, when Adam falls, Satan now becomes the de facto or the in fact possessor and controller of the earth. And then with this, which I believe is the one that happens first, you have him having that title, the Prince of the Power of the Air. And those two are really very close now to getting him the goal that he's after, to be the possessor of heaven and earth. And so everything that happens from when this happens in the heavens and then this happens on the earth in the garden, everything you have happening from, now don't lose me here. Everything that is happening from this point forward, boy, I just almost hate to call it this because that's not going to be accurate all the way, but just to frame it in your mind, is the chess match in which Satan is making moves to hold on to what he has gotten control of and even go beyond that. To not only just maintain control of that, but to get total control of that. If he can succeed in doing that, it's going to be very difficult now to wrest it away from him. I actually think there's something he's going to try to do between the heavens and the earth to bring them together into one, which would solidify his hold on them. But he needs total control to be able to do that. At least that's my understanding of it. But what God is doing is he is making moves now to repossess the heavenly places and repossess the earth back to himself. But you know he's not doing that by his omnipotent power. Because if he was, the moment Satan said in his heart, God could have immediately consigned him to the lake of fire. See, people say, well, wait, doesn't God know everything? Yes. Well, if he's omniscient, didn't he know Satan would rebel? Yes. And so why did he allow him to do that? Why didn't he just stop all of that and throw him immediately into the lake of fire? Does he have the power to do that? Well, of course he does. And that's at the heart of this issue. Why is God doing this the way he's doing it? It's not as though he's removed himself to just say, well, let's just see how this pans out. There is something, and that's why, folks, that's why at the end of last week's lesson, I spent all that time talking about God's cause. There is something he is proving. And to put it in a nutshell, at the end of all of this, by the way, when he created the angels, did he evidently create them with the ability to rebel? Indeed he did. He is proving that he alone is qualified and worthy to be the possessor of heaven and earth. Not based on the fact that he's omnipotent and he can just make it happen no matter what, but that he alone. And at the end of this, even Satan and his minions will admit that God is the only rightful possessor of heaven and earth. And we're going to go out into eternity with that. Not even Satan will be able to admit. Every mouth will be stopped. Every knee will bow of things in earth and in heaven. All of that's going to be admitted. And so we're created with a will, just like those angels are created with a will, and there's something your Father's doing. And if we lose sight, that's why we're doing this, because verse 12 in Romans 12 is the perfect place now to go back and pull this issue out and hook it into what you're about to see when it talks about rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing instant in prayer. This is the thing that has to be in your thinking so that you really see this when I say bigger picture, it's the thing that has been in place since the beginning. It's the biggest picture. It's the one that is still unfolding. A lot more to say about that. It is true that on that cross there was a victory that was made. Satan and his minions were spoiled, so to speak, in a military sense. And I'll give you that scripture very quickly. In Colossians 2:13, and you being dead in your sins and the uncircumcision of your flesh. That's, by the way, why Paul calls us twice dead Gentiles. We're not only dead in sin, but we weren't part of what he was doing with the nation of Israel either. But he says, being dead in your sins and the uncircumcision of your flesh, hath he quickened together with him, having forgiven you all trespasses, blotting out the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, which was contrary to us, and took it out of the way, nailing it to his cross, and having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it, talking about his cross. Now, I've only given you that one reference, but there's others that we could turn to and look at that. So yes, everything that needed to be provided for was provided for in that cross. And by the way, since you know that if Satan had known about this mystery, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. That gives you insight into just how important it was to keep everybody in the dark about what was being accomplished by that. And when Satan decides to nail him to the cross, or actually you say, well, Satan didn't do it himself. He actually got the rulers of the Jewish nation to do it. But the thing you need to understand is today, Satan's not going to walk through these doors and tear this assembly up. It's going to be men. And Paul warns you about them. They are emissaries of the adversary. They're going to be doing his work. Some of them will do it not knowing what they're doing. He'll use their ignorance. Others will come in the door knowing exactly what they're doing. So it's not going to be him. And by the way, this opens up a very interesting thing. Having spoiled, it didn't say having spoiled Satan. There are places that this issue is raised up for Satan. But in this verse, I chose it because it says, and having spoiled principalities and powers. Now, why them? Does that not conjure up, and we will talk about this in the second session, Ephesians chapter 6, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against what? That's right, principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. Well, wait a minute, you know what? Well, maybe I should reserve all of this for when we get over there, but I'll just say this much now. You say, okay, well, Satan's not omnipresent, so, of course, he's using... But when we think about spiritual warfare, we don't think too much about principalities and powers that are sitting in seats of authority up here, that we're actually wrestling against them. How in the world are they involved in this? And they are. And so there's something to be, again, the terminology is going to take our thinking a little further than that just basic idea of, Satan's got a policy of evil, and, and we're trying to overcome that. Okay, well, more about that, but I can't digress about this. What I want to talk to you about now, and I need to go ahead and erase this now because I'm going to draw this differently. It's my understanding that there are 24 divisions of the government of God in that second heaven. And because there are, and in Daniel, now let me do it this way. This will be the best way to do it. Instead of first showing you why I think there's 24, let me show you the fact that no matter how many you think there are, the Bible makes it clear that in the heavenly places, all of of those divisions of government controlled by a principality is the big shot in his division of that government. If you're going to make an analogy to this, think about the United States being a single country, but we're made up of 50 states, and every state has its own government. And the guy that's in charge in Texas right now is Rick Perry. He's the governor of the state. And then you've got this whole hierarchy that comes down in the heavenly places, and that's why you have principality, and what you're going to find used oftentimes is the word prince, because that's the root word of principality. And then you have powers, and then you have thrones, and then you have might, and then you have dominions. And I don't think that's all of them, but I know for sure that Paul mentions every one of those. And as you talk about, this is down the pecking order, so to speak, of positions of power. And when Satan went after, as Revelation says, got 1/3 of the angels, he didn't just go after any of them at all, and he happened to wind up with 1/3. He went after the guys in positions of authority because they're in control. And so what you wind up now with is references over and over again to the principalities and the powers, because they're the big shots in the governmental seats of authority in God's government. And so when he gets them, as we're about to read in Daniel, he gets all of them but one. That's what we're going to look at now, just to get that established in our mind. Daniel chapter 10, and we'll start reading in verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the thing was true, but the time appointed was long. And he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. In those days I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. Now, that 3 full weeks would be 21 days. And that's what I'm trying to get in your mind right now. Now let's move down to verse 5. Then I lifted, this is Daniel, and then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, his face as the appearance of lightning, his eyes as lamps of fire, his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. This is the angelic messenger that has come to give Daniel the answer to the prayer that he's been fasting and praying about for 21 days. And when that angel shows up, Daniel describes him, and I left off just for time's sake, but what verse 7 tells you is that Daniel says, when I saw him, I fell asleep on my face. He passed out. Now Daniel's no wimp. This is the guy that goes into the lion's den. Now it's easy to dismiss that. Hey, when I was a kid, I used to get up early on Saturday mornings and watch the Tarzan programs. Johnny Weissmuller. Don't tell me I'm the only one old enough to know about that. I'd watch Johnny Weissmuller be Tarzan and all that, and I'd see him take on a lion with just a knife. And you know what I thought as a kid? I can do that. And well, the first 2 got eaten by the lion. Okay, Bob's really old. He knows the ones before Johnny Weissmuller. So I looked at it and I thought, that doesn't look so tough. I think I could do that. And then one day you go to the zoo and you see a lion. And then you watch one of those National Geographic documentaries and you see you know, the hyenas chasing all of the female lions away from the kill, and then you see the male come roaring in, and they scatter like flies, you know, and he grabs the leader, and he puts her down, and he just bites through her neck. And suddenly you realize that might not be as easy as Tarzan made that look, right? Okay, and this is Daniel. He's in the, so I'm trying to say is, you're in the lion's den. And he didn't faint from that, but he fainted from this. And in the next verse we're about to read, you're going to see where the angel just reaches down and pulls him up on his hands and knees and tells him to stand up. So this is a pretty frightening appearance of, and by the way, this, I believe this is a warrior or soldier angel. Angels have different jobs up there, and there's a reason he's a soldier. You're about to find out why. So let's look at this next passage here. Verse 10, and behold, a hand touched me, which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hands. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Now Daniel's still not sure about this, right? Then said he unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. From the first day, how long's Daniel been at it? 21 days. From the first day, he said, your words were heard, and I've come to give you this. Now he's going to explain, well, what's been happening? I guess it was a long ways off, and it's just taken you that long to get here. But something else is happening. Verse 13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. So in a nutshell, here's what's happened. The first day Daniel starts, this angel is dispatched with a message for Daniel, but he is held up by the prince of Persia for 21 days. Now, when you think about that, you have to understand that if the angel, and I've talked to you about this before a little bit, and we haven't done an exhaustive study on it yet, but when you're up in that second heaven, you just don't go willy-nilly wherever you want to go. There are paths and ways, and the angels follow those paths, and they lead through territory. And since those mostly belong to Satan, that's traveling through enemy territory. And when he says that he withstood me for 21 days, does that mean as the angel tried to get by, the prince of Persia just kept standing in front of him, whichever way he was going to go, he couldn't get around him? See, I'm looking at this, that there's not only a contest going here, but for 21 days, either this angel is involved in a nonstop combat or he's been held up captive. Because look what he says at the end when he gets through talking about Michael. He says, and I remain there with the kings of Persia. See, you kind of get the idea from that terminology of, I couldn't get through there. Michael, one of the chief princes, we'll talk about why chief princes in just a moment. But one of the chief princes comes to help him, and he says, and now I've come to make you understand. So he says, because Michael, I was able to get away, and I'm here, and now we're going to read one more passage out of this where he says, I've got to get back because something else is happening. And here it is in verse 20. Then said he, knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now I will return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I'm gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. So now we've got a second guy here. You understand, the prince of Persia and the prince of Grecia, those are the bad guys. This angel has been held up for 21 days. Michael comes and frees him up, but he goes, I got to go back because another guy is coming. Look at verse 21. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael, your prince. He didn't say, with everyone else, it was the prince of Persia, it was the prince of Grecia. But when he talks to Daniel, he doesn't say, Michael, the prince of, he says, your prince. And what nation would that be? Exactly. And so that is, Michael is the prince of Israel. Now we have some information. This information tells us, and by the way, someone says, well, that's not angels up there. That was the prince of Persia that was having him arrested. Did you read the description of the angel that made Daniel pass out? That's no man. Michael the archangel, he doesn't need to come and fight with the human prince of Persia. He couldn't hold this angel up if he wanted to. Do you remember when the Assyrian army was camped outside? Remember Judah was going to fall, and God had told them they were going to fall, but Sennacherib made the mistake of sending an emissary to the king of Judah saying, hey, everybody else says their God's going to deliver them. Don't make the mistake to think that your God's going to deliver you. He said that to the guy that trusted in the real God. So God goes, oh, well, one day this Assyrian is going to overcome, but for now, not today, because you did that. Do you remember? The Assyrian army camped that night outside, and when they woke up the next morning, after the death angel passed through, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers lay dead on the battlefield. And Sennacherib thought, my stomach doesn't feel too good. I guess I'll go home. And he did. A single angel. So the prince of Persia held a guy up, not going to hold water. This is a battle going on in the heavenlies. And that's why I'm saying, if it's just a dimensional thing, he's not traveling anywhere. You understand? He can go from point A to point B. But these angels are actually traveling through areas to get somewhere. Now that makes me want to draw a different diagram than the one we had up here earlier. And that is indeed what we're going to do. So, for this terminology, let me wind this session up by giving you this, and that is this terminology that I've been using. Paul uses it in Romans 8:38, for I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things to come. He's using that terminology there to show you about the things that cannot separate us from the love of Christ. Again, in Ephesians 3:10, to the intent that now, under the principalities and powers in heavenly places. Now, we know for sure where that is. Might be known by the church, the manifold wisdom of God. And what that verse is saying is, it's our job to make God's manifold wisdom known to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places. And folks, that's at the core of what we're talking about here. This is the very heart of the matter. And that's why that knowledge, along with understanding what God's doing by not just ending it all in the beginning, but allowing this thing to play out, and why He's not intervening in the physical circumstances of your life, but He's doing something by the power of His grace in your inner man that actually works to conform you to the image of His Son, which, being delivered all day long, can never do. That doesn't conform you to anything. You're like children who are waiting on God to bail them out. So once all of this picture becomes clear, and you read rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, all of a sudden you go like, yeah, that's the issue. Well, okay, well, maybe I'm jumping the gun on you here, but I'm just trying to show you this is not for no reason. This is at the heart of this. Okay, so let's do this next one. Ephesians 6:12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against power. By the way, those principalities and powers are using flesh and blood. But Paul's saying, look beyond that flesh and blood. Why would he even say not flesh and blood? Because that's what you would naturally think. But you're going to have to see beyond that to something that's moving and orchestrating things behind that, against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. And so I'm going to give you this one now in Colossians chapter 1, because there is governmental authority in the earth, and those terms are used there too. For by him were all things created. Now watch carefully. This is important. I got 4.5 minutes, so look, get this right. We have this idea that we see a phrase and we're going to interpret that to mean what we think it means without paying attention to the context and the words that are being used. Let's not be sloppy in our understanding here. For by him were all things created. Right off the bat, you would naturally think, oh, he created the heavens and the host of them and the earth and all that in it is, right? That's not what he's going to be talking about. I jumped you off into verse 16, but he's going to qualify what the all things are. Those all things, he's not talking about, I made the birds, I made the fish, I made that's not what he's talking about. Take a look. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth. You said, well, you haven't proved it to me by that phrase. The only thing those phrases are doing is saying, whatever these all things are, it's not just the things in the heaven, but it's all things in the heaven and the earth. Here's the next part. Visible and invisible. Someone would say, well, the air is invisible and he created that, so that would be it. But now he's going to give you some examples. Whether they be, and notice he didn't say, whether they be birds or air or water or trees or animals or clouds or rainbows or unicorns or... Everything he names in the list is a position of governmental authority. There's something that you're supposed to understand by this. Let's just read it and then we'll talk it. Whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things, those kinds of all things were created by him and for him. And you know what that means? Government is a divine institution. God is the creator of it. He has a purpose behind it. There's something he wants it to accomplish. And there's something his government in that second heaven was meant to accomplish. And he is also the creator of human government. And there's a different purpose behind human government than the government in the heavenly places. Because human government is meant to solve problems. When he instituted his government in the heavenly places, there weren't any problems that needed to be solved. There was something else it was doing. But we'll have a chance to talk about that. Do you see the all things, how it's being qualified here? So here's what he's saying. All those things, with regard to governmental positions of authority, were created by him and for him. There's something that's to be served in all of that. Okay, to finish this up, okay, well, I tell you what, this is a good place because that's where the notes stop, and I thought I had one more thing to say. So here's what I'm going to do. When we come back from the break, Titus isn't in this one, is it? Yeah, it is. Oh, it is? I'm sorry, one more. Okay. Put them in mind to be subject to, this is the one on earth, principalities and powers, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work. It's true that the Bible uses principalities and powers with regard to earthly, governmental, but that's not a surprise, is it? Because Colossians already told us whether they be things in heaven or whether they be things in the earth, right? All of those things were created by him and for him. Now, when we come back from the break, I'm going to lay out my case for why I think the government of heaven is divided into 24 parts, and I'm going to draw the diagram differently than I've ever drawn it before. In fact, Sunday, I'll just tell you this, Sunday I was drawing this diagram up there, and I drew it the way I've always drawn it, and then I was looking at it, and toward the end of the session on Sunday, I went, you know what, actually, that really shouldn't go like that, because if it did, this or that would happen. What would happen was that angel wouldn't have had any problem getting to Daniel. I said, actually, it has to be laid out differently. And then this whole thing opened up. So I spent 20 minutes after the tape ran out on Sunday redrawing this diagram, and then I fine-tuned it during the week, so you guys are actually the first ones that are going to get to see this. So anyway, I'm looking at that, and I keep thinking, boy, those verses were staring you in the head the whole time. What was